Hi everyone, welcome to Friends List. I'm Tracey, Lien, Polygon senior reporter, and I'm joined today by Farokhmanesh.
Hey, how's it going?
I got your name right, yes. So we're here today to talk about female heroes in games, and this came about because of a story you wrote yesterday from E3.
Yes, so one of the big games at E3 this year is Assassin's Creed Unity, and one of the big new features is that you can play co-op with people online. So basically the way it's set up is you, the player, you're always Arnaud, who's the new assassin, and all your friends are kind of random male assassins. So we've spoken to Ubisoft in a couple different interviews with myself, Benkachera, and Chris Plant, and each time we were given the same answer, that there were actually supposed to be female assassins in the game, and they were cut because it was just too much production, double the animations, double the voice work, and ultimately, since everything is based off of Arnaud, it was either cut Arnaud, which wasn't an option, or cut the female assassins, and so that's what they went with.
So the idea is that it would have cost too much to model a female character's body, is that?
They weren't specific, all they said was production, so it's still a little bit unclear if it was a time crunch because the game is already slated to come out October 28th, and that's usually when Assassin's Creed games come out, is in October, or if it was a money thing. We're still unclear.
Do you think that's a good excuse?
So I think that on an individual basis, yes, for a developer to say, ultimately we don't have the production, we don't have the bandwidth to do it, yes, that would be it's not even an excuse, that's a good reason. I think if you pull back and you take a look at the industry though, it's a little bit of a different picture because it's not the first time we've heard this, it's not the first time we've heard similar excuses, and I think that at the end of the day, you can come up with a million reasons not to include women in your games.
And so, I guess looking at the broader industry picture, why does it matter? I mean, for a lot of people, they'll be like, it's just video games. Well, why does it matter when what you can play as a female character? Just play the game, get over it.
I think, to start off with, I think that they're just video games thing it's total bullshit, to put it bluntly. Because when it comes down to it, video games are a medium. It's a huge industry. They're an important, growing, interactive medium that we don't have anything else quite like it. They're not like movies, they're not like TV. You can put yourself into this world. And women are half of that audience. And developers continue to pretend, or maybe not even pretend, but just not reach out to us. And that sucks. I mean, that's the best way I can put it. What do you think?
So I think that anytime anyone consumes media, their worldview is being shaped in some way, even some teeny tiny way, like when we read books, when we watch television, when we have conversations with people. Now, video games, a game like Assassin's Creed, how many hours would you say you've sunk into an Assassin's Creed game?
Yeah, that's another thing too. So Assassin's Creed is actually a franchise that I followed from the very beginning. I own all the games. I'm a nutso person about this franchise. And it's not like we haven't seen women in the series before, Brotherhood, and I think a couple of the others.
Assassin's Creed Liberation, hero.
Exactly. So Brotherhood, for example, you could recruit female assassins and they would, be sent off with the males. There was no difference. So I don't think it's that Ubisoft is, giving female gamers the finger, being we're not going to include you, because they already have. But again, we're still just not seeing it as much. That means the world to me to see myself or something even close to that represented in games. And it sucks that I can't do that.
Yeah, I think it comes back to messaging where, if all the games you're playing exclude women and all the media you're consuming excludes women, that's going to chip away at your mind in some way, and it's going to shape your worldview in some way.
Right.
And I think that is, potentially damaging to, kids growing up playing these games, but also to women who are playing them and feeling excluded. It's there's really no reason for it.
Right. You did a lot of research on this. You just wrote a feature about it.
Yes. So in my story, No Girls Allowed, it was looking at the way marketing has shaped the way we view video games. So if you were a kid growing up in the late 80s, early 90s, all the advertising and all the gaming related content you were seeing, the messaging for that was video games are for boys. It was the Game Boy, not the Game Girl. If you looked at the original TV ad for the PlayStation 1, clearly targeted at boys. So if you grew up in that time period, you don't know any better, right? You just think, well, of course games are for boys. No one has told me otherwise. And so if games continue to perpetuate that message through the exclusion of female heroes, I think the problem continues. And then if you look at that problem that was created in the 90s, we're still seeing the ramifications of it today. There are still very few women working in the games industry. There are very few women who identify as gamers because they think, well, it's just not for me. And who said it's not for women? It's all in the messaging. And so I think it's important for game developers and game players to be conscious of that.
I think that's a message that we continue to just hammer into women and, you know, young girls growing up. If you look at the way the games are presented, like if you happen to take a stroll around the convention center right now, a lot of the posters that are up are white men or a lot of like violence. And I think that to the outside world, that's all video games are, because that's all they ever get to see. That's what a lot of trailers are. They're violence, they're crazy. And that's sending the wrong message because there's so much more there. Yeah. Or even if you look at how many women were on stage doing presentations, Danielle just did, you know, an opinion piece on that. I mean, one of the few things that I actually really liked was, I think it was during Microsoft's press conference, it was Project Spark. And you know, it starts off and it's this male character talking to this little blue spark who has a female voice, and they're talking about this world they've created. And then it switches and you see that the spark is actually another player, it's a female character, and she's taking him through her world now. And it's the simplest thing, but it stands out so much because you don't ever see that. And it's amazing because I think about, like, you know, this immediately caught me because Project Spark is something that as a kid growing up, like, I would have been crazy into. And I'm just like, you know, to see that as a little girl growing up would have meant so much to me.
Yeah, and the other thing with video games is, unlike television or film or books, it's interactive, so you can actually, you know, control the character. And so to be able to inhabit the body of someone who you relate to, I think that could mean a lot to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And so when we're looking at excuses for not including women in games, with Capcom's Deep Down, their excuse was that it's not a part of the narrative for us to have playable female characters. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, I think that's a bullshit answer.
Yeah.
I think that everyone is entitled to write their own story, but it's not that hard to include women. It's not like having a woman in your game is going to really change that much. What it comes down to, I think, is that perhaps the industry or writers or developers view women as some kind of different character. They treat women as like some kind of mystical unicorn. And if you have a woman in a game, she has to be this kind of woman. She has to be this kind of character. Women can be written the exact same way as men. Like their lines of dialogue can be exactly the same and it will change nothing. And I don't think a lot of people consider that.
Yeah, and even stuff like the way a female character looks. There's this idea that they have to look really different to the male characters. They have to have like a teeny tiny waist. They have to have, you know, amazing curves, and you know they have to be dressed incredibly differently. It's like, if you've watched Game of Thrones, the Brienne character is pretty tough. Or like, you know, if you look at any female MMA fighter, they don't exactly fit the ideal, but they're still tough as heck. And if anything, if you're going to play like some warrior character, then you probably want someone who is totally ripped,
right,
who can like beat you up in the octagon, if they were going to go into the octagon.
Right. I mean, going back to what Ubisoft said, and this isn't about crucifying Ubisoft as a studio or their game. I still think it's probably going to be a pretty good game. But at the same time, they talk about everything is based off our nose, so that's why we don't have male animations. Like, why can't you have a female character that's maybe built the same way as him, that maybe moves the same way as him? He's an assassin. That means that a female assassin is going to be just as stealthy and quick. Maybe she's a heavier assassin. Why does she have to be a tiny little woman?
Yeah, yeah. And then there's the concept of like the male character being the default. It's like, well, we had to create a female character would have required so many more resources. It's like, well, I guess that's the problem there, that we see the male character as the default character. That's the norm. And if we want to have a female character, suddenly we have to go out of our way. What a burden she is.
Exactly.
And I think that's problematic.
Yeah, it just says, again, like, women aren't part of this industry. We are not the default, like you said.
Mm. And so I was looking at games where they do have a female hero. They've made the effort. So we've mentioned Assassin's Creed Liberation, which was really cool. And then Broforce, which, you know, this is a game with the word bro in the name, and even they have gone out of their way to include female characters. I think, what difference does that make to you as a game player when you can play as a female character?
I mean, taking Broforce, for example, bro is actually a funny word because it's something that I use as a general neutral thing, so I would consider you a bro. It's just like a friendly term. So I like that they have kind of taken the same stance, and it's like, well, anybody can be a bro, it's whatever. So the thing is, when it comes to artistic license and what people can do in games, I think that, yeah, like, people are allowed to tell the story they want to tell. We were talking earlier about Brothers, and you mentioned that people had complained that there wasn't a female option. Why couldn't they have been sisters? And then, you know, you mentioned it's because that the story was about them. It was about these two brothers, that what they went through in real life. And I think that that's fine. I mean, Brothers is a good game in a lot of ways. It's one of my favorite games, actually. I think when you get into games that offer customization, but then they don't offer female options, it gets a little bit trickier. I mean, South Park, for example, Alexa did another opinion piece on this because it allowed you to put yourself in the game, but then you couldn't be a woman, and it's because the creators wanted to tell this specific story.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like half-assed customization when it comes down to it.
Yeah, and it's sort of like a kick in the gut as well. It's like, you know, you can look any way you want, but you can't be a woman because why? Like
it's not even just that it's a problem with women, it's a problem across many different gaps that we have. I mean, you look at Nintendo and Tomodachi Life, and when they said, we're not trying to make a statement with including gay characters, sometimes by not including that, you're making more of a statement than you meant to.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of people would, they tend to make the argument of, you know, let's not make it political here, you know, but I think by choosing to not include a certain gender or a certain sexuality, that in itself is a political statement. You know, adopting the norm is a political statement, whether or not you want it to be.
And I don't think the developers set out to say, we're not going to include women in our game because of, you know, X reasons. I think it's sometimes that they don't think about it, to be honest, and then they circle back and it's sort of like, oh, whoops, like it was just something we didn't even consider.
Well, I guess that's privilege, right? You don't have to think about it.
Exactly.
So, it's rounding it off, like, why is this important? I mean, again, it comes back to the whole, it's just video games, yeah, get over it. I mean, what's your closing remark?
Again, like, I think that argument is silly because you have people saying, they're just video games, don't make a big deal about it, you're freaking out over nothing. And then you have the people that talk about how video games are important to them, how it's helped them do something in their lives, or it's been such a huge impact. And you can't have it both ways. Either video games are a meaningless medium and they mean nothing, and yeah, no one else in the world should take us seriously, or they are something. They can be something more than what we've got so far. They can be political, they can have commentary. It's just about balance. Like, there's nothing wrong with having games with male characters. We just also need female characters and transgender characters and gay characters. It's just about including everybody.
I am inclined to agree with all of that. Well, thank you very much for joining me, Megan, and thank you all for watching at home. We will be here at E3 all week, and if you have hateful comments, direct them to someone who cares. Thank you very much.